This rock is about the size of your fist. Inside it are two animals. Each one is a little over 2 centimeters long. They belong to a species called Arthropleura. The adults were more than 2.5 meters long and weighed around 50 kilograms. It is the largest land arthropod that has ever existed. We have been finding pieces of it since 1854. And in all that time, 170 years, nobody had ever seen its face. For more than 100 million years, the animals crawling around on land were the size of your thumb. Then, for a window of about 30 million years, some of them grew to the size of a car. Dragonflies with the wingspan of a hawk. Millipedes longer than a person is tall. And then it stopped. It has never happened again, not anywhere in 300 million years. Something opened the door, and then something closed it. This is before us. The history of the world before anyone was here to see it. The date is 320 million years ago. For the first time, the continents are covered in forest, and the air is about to become something no animal has breathed since. And hold on to that missing face. We are going to come back to it, and when we do, it is going to change what kind of animal you think this was. Walk into that forest and almost nothing about it will make sense. Stand at the base of one of these trunks and look up. There is nothing above you for 30 meters. No branches, no canopy, just a bare column going up into a crown you can barely make out. The light comes down in shafts between the trunks, green and thick, and it does not move because there are no leaves down here for the wind to catch. The trunk beside you is 50 meters tall, and it is not covered in bark. It is covered in scales, diamond-shaped scars in tight spirals, so the surface reads less like a tree than like the skin of a reptile. These are not ferns, and they are not trees. They are lycopsids, giant relatives of a plant you can find today in damp woodland, 10 centimeters tall. And there is one more thing. Cut one open and there is almost no wood inside. A modern tree is a column of timber wrapped in a thin skin. This is the opposite, a thin core of wood inside a very thick rind. 50 meters tall, and it is standing up because of its bark. Now, before we go any further, I already know what you are thinking. Oxygen, 35% oxygen. That is the answer everybody has heard, and it is the answer I would have given too. Put it in the comments now so you can see where you started, because it is not wrong. It is about half of what actually happened, and the other half is stranger. Here's what this forest is doing to the planet. A tree grows by taking carbon out of the air. When it dies and rots, that carbon goes straight back where it came from. The system balances and nothing changes. But in these swamps, the trees fall into standing water. Water that is stagnant, acidic, and starved of oxygen. Down there, decay is slow. Slow enough that the next tree falls before the last one has finished going. So it stacks. Meter after meter of half-rotted plant material, compressing under its own weight into peat, buried and compressed again. Every atom of carbon locked into that pile is an atom that did not go back into the air. And for every atom of carbon that stays buried, an atom of oxygen stays behind. Across roughly 60 million years, this happens on a scale that has never been repeated. Atmospheric oxygen climbs from around 13% at the end of the Devonian to somewhere between 30 and 35%. Today's air is 21, and you can see the consequence written into the coal itself. Coal contains fossil charcoal, the residue of wildfire. In coal formed over the last 50 million years, charcoal makes up something like 4 to 8% of the material. In some carboniferous seams, it is 70. This was not a world that occasionally burned. In air that rich, a single lightning strike could ignite vegetation that was soaking wet, and the fire would not go out. And there is a hard edge to this. Push the oxygen much past 35%, and the forest cannot exist at all. Everything burns, wet or dry, and nothing green survives long enough to grow tall. These trees are standing at the exact limit of what the air will allow. And it does something very specific to one group of animals. An insect has no lungs. It has openings along its flanks called spiracles, which lead into a branching network of fine tubes, and oxygen reaches the tissue by diffusing down them. Diffusion has a hard ceiling. Past a certain body size, oxygen simply cannot reach deep enough, and the animal suffocates from the inside out. Raise the concentration of oxygen in the air, and you push that ceiling outward. This is not a theory about evolution, it is physics. So there it is, the first answer. The forests buried carbon on a scale the planet had never seen. Oxygen climbed to a level it has never reached since. And for the first time, an arthropod could get very large without suffocating. But there is a problem with that story. Not with the oxygen, with the coal. Because you have to ask why the carbon got buried in the first place. And the famous answer goes like this. The trees had invented lignin, the tough polymer that makes wood rigid. And nothing had yet evolved that could digest it. So for 60 million years, dead trees simply piled up, indigestible, while the fungi caught up. It is a wonderful story. Almost every account of this period tells some version of it. In 2016, a team led by Matthew Nelson took it apart. The scale trees, it turns out, were mostly rind rather than wood. Lignin was never the main ingredient, and the ability to break it down was already widespread. But the argument really ends on arithmetic. If lignin decay had genuinely stopped for 60 million years, the quantity of carbon taken out of circulation would have been so vast that the global carbon cycle would have broken. It did not break. So the coal was not a biological accident. It was geography. Pangaea was assembling. The collision of continents dropped a belt of subsiding basins across the equator and held them there, wet, for tens of millions of years. The right rock, in the right place, at the right latitude, for long enough. Which means the giants were not produced by an evolutionary quirk. They were produced by a coincidence of tectonics. So, how large did that coincidence let things get? Start with the biggest. Arthropleura is known from fragments, from molted shells, and from its trackways, parallel rows of small prints running across ancient sediment, sometimes for meters at a stretch, looking uncannily like tire tracks. From those and from the fragments, we get an animal more than 2.5 meters long, weighing around 50 kilograms. Longer than a person is tall, heavier than a large dog. It is built like a millipede, a long flattened body of repeating armored segments, each segment carrying 2 pairs of legs, dozens of pairs in total, moving in slow traveling waves down the length of the animal. It lived from about 345 million years ago until about 290. It is the largest arthropod ever to walk on land, and nothing since has come close. Above it, the air belongs to something else. Meganeura looks at a glance like a dragonfly. It is not. It belongs to an extinct order called the Meganisoptera, and the resemblance is a family likeness, not an identity. Its wingspan reaches around 70 centimeters. Its later relative Meganeuropsis, which lived just after the Carboniferous ended, reached about 71, the largest flying insect ever recorded. Hold your arms out at shoulder width. That is roughly the animal. Its wings are membrane stretched over a lattice of veins, thin enough to see light through. Its eyes take up most of its head. It is a hunter, and everything it hunts is also an arthropod. They are not alone. There are scorpions here approaching a meter in length, breathing air through book lungs. There are cockroach relatives the size of your hand. There are spiders and mites, and in the water, early amphibians 2 meters long with skulls shaped like shovels. But notice what is missing. There are no birds, no bats, no pterosaurs. Nothing with a backbone has ever left the ground. The sky in this forest belongs entirely to insects, and in the whole history of the planet up to this moment, it has never had a single competitor. Remember that. So the explanation writes itself. The forests made the oxygen. The oxygen lifted the ceiling on arthropod size. The arthropods grew into the space above it. Almost every documentary ever made about this period ends here. That is the answer. High oxygen made giants possible, and when the oxygen fell, the giants went with it. It is clean, it is memorable, and the fossil record does not support it. In 2012, Matthew Clapham and Jared Carr did something nobody had done before. They measured wings. More than 10,500 fossil insect wing lengths spanning from the Carboniferous to the present day, plotted against reconstructed atmospheric oxygen. For the first 150 million years, the match is remarkable. Oxygen rises, insects get bigger. Oxygen falls, insects get smaller. Then, around 140 million years ago, the two lines come apart. Oxygen goes back up, and insects keep getting smaller. They go on getting smaller through periods when the air is richer than it has been in 100 million years. So something else had taken over as the limit. And the timing points at one thing. The break coincides with the spread of the earliest birds. And it tightens further, later, as those birds became more maneuverable in the air, which reframes the entire period. Oxygen was never what made them giants. Oxygen only set the ceiling. What let them reach it was that nothing else could fly. For 60 million years, an insect the size of a hawk had no natural enemy in the air. Because there was nothing else in the air, they were not giants because the atmosphere was generous. They were giants because the sky was empty. So what closed it? Around 305 million years ago, the forests fail. The cause is climate. Pangaea keeps assembling, ice sheets grow and shrink at the southern pole, and the equatorial belt swings toward drier, more seasonal conditions. The swamps need standing water all year round. They stop getting it. What follows is not a single event, it is a staircase. First, opportunistic ferns become more common. Then, across a geologically short interval, the scale trees collapse. The leucopsids that had built this entire forest for tens of millions of years are almost entirely gone. And the rainforest does not retreat evenly. It breaks into islands. The islands drift further apart. And then, in the fossil record, they stop appearing at all. The consequence is exactly what you would expect, and then something you would not. Before the collapse, the same species turn up everywhere across the tropical belt. Afterwards, each surviving island develops its own distinct mixture. Extinction rates among four-limbed animals peak. Local diversity implodes. But there is a second effect. In 2010, Sardasani, Michael Benton, and Howard Falcon Lang showed that the collapse did not simply reduce tetrapod diversity. It restructured it. The animals tied to permanent wetland lost their world. The animals that could survive away from standing water, the amniotes, the group with the shelled egg, inherited the dry ground between the islands. And the giants go with the forest. Arthropleura disappears. The griffinflies shrink, and then they are gone. The great scorpions follow them. Oxygen falls too over the following tens of millions of years, and that certainly did not help. The plants take the heaviest losses. The collapse of these forests is counted among the two largest extinction events ever recorded for plant life, but by then it hardly mattered. The habitat that produced them was already gone, and it was never rebuilt. Which brings us back to that missing face. For 170 years, Arthropleura was known almost entirely from headless remains because what usually fossilizes is a molted shell, and when an arthropod molts, the head comes away with it. In October 2024, a team in France scanned two juvenile specimens still trapped inside rock at Mont-Soleil-Mines. One of them had a complete head, antennae, eyes on stalks, mandibles, the whole feeding apparatus. And it was the wrong head. The body is a Millipedes, 2 pairs of legs on every segment. The head is a centipede's, in the position of the mandibles and the shape of the mouth parts. But the detail that matters most is quieter than that. The mouth parts and the legs point the same way. This was an animal built to move slowly and to process plant material. The largest land arthropod that has ever lived was, in all probability, eating dead leaves. So what actually happened here? Three things had to be true at the same time, and none of them had anything to do with the others. Geography had to lay a belt of permanently wet basins across the equator and hold them there, an accident of continental collision that has not repeated since. Those basins had to bury carbon fast enough and for long enough to push atmospheric oxygen to a level this planet has not reached again. And the sky had to be empty because nothing with a backbone had yet learned to fly. Remove any one of those three and the giants become impossible. The Carboniferous held all three open at once for about 60 million years and then closed all three within a geological moment of each other. They did not fail. Nothing outcompeted them. The conditions that made them expired and they have never been issued again. There is one more thing, and you are holding the other end of it. That peat did not stay peat. Buried deep, compressed and heated for 300 million years, it became coal. And it sat there, untouched, until about 1750. Every lump of coal that has ever been burned is a Carboniferous plant that failed to rot. The carbon inside it was pulled out of the atmosphere by a forest that stood before there were dinosaurs, before there were birds, before there were flowers. It took those swamps roughly 60 million years to put that carbon underground. We have been putting it back for about 270. And the reason it cannot happen again is not the one you would guess. The air does hold less oxygen than it did. But even if you refilled it tomorrow, even if you brought the atmosphere back up to 35%, you would not get a dragonfly the size of a hawk. Because the moment one appeared, something with feathers would eat it. The giants were not built by generous air. They were built by an empty sky, and the sky has been occupied for 140 million years. If this is the kind of thing you want more of, slow, careful and honest about what we do not know, the like button genuinely helps this channel find people like you. And the answer you put in the comments at the start: oxygen. Tell me whether you would still write it now. Because the forests are gone, the giants are gone, and the survivors have spread out across a dry supercontinent further from water than any vertebrate has ever managed to live. They are about to do extremely well. And then, on the far side of Pangaea, underneath what is now Siberia, the ground is going to open. That is where we go next.